As we cross the age of 50, many of us start paying closer attention to our health. We think about our heart, our bones, our memory. But there's one common habit that often escapes serious scrutiny: alcohol. A glass of wine with dinner, a weekend drink with friends, a nightcap before bed. It feels normal, even harmless. Sometimes we're told it's good for the heart. But what does the science actually say? When it comes to alcohol and cancer risk after 50, the data are clear and not particularly comforting. Alcohol is classified as a Group 1 carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. That's the same category as tobacco and asbestos. Not because alcohol is equally dangerous in the same doses, but because we have strong evidence in humans that it causes cancer. So, how does alcohol increase cancer risk? When you drink, your body metabolizes ethanol into acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is a toxic compound that can damage DNA and interfere with the body's ability to repair that damage. DNA damage is the first step toward cancer development. Over time, repeated exposure increases the likelihood that damaged cells grow uncontrollably. Alcohol also increases levels of estrogen and other hormones, which helps explain its link to breast cancer. It can increase oxidative stress, promote inflammation, and make it easier for carcinogens, like those from tobacco, to penetrate cells. In other words, alcohol doesn't just act alone. It can amplify other risks. Now let's talk specifics. Alcohol consumption is associated with increased risk of cancers of the mouth, throat, esophagus, liver, colon, rectum, and breast. And here's the part that surprises many people. The risk starts at low levels of intake. There is no completely safe threshold for cancer risk. After age 50, this becomes even more relevant. Why? Because cancer risk rises with age. Our cells have accumulated decades of DNA damage. Our detoxification systems are less efficient. Immune surveillance, the body's ability to detect and eliminate abnormal cells, declines. Add a known carcinogen to that environment, and the equation shifts further in the wrong direction. Let's consider colorectal cancer. Risk increases significantly after 50, which is why screening typically begins at this age. Alcohol is a well-established risk factor. Even moderate drinking has been linked to higher rates of colon cancer. And unlike some risk factors we can't control, like genetics, alcohol intake is entirely modifiable. Breast cancer is another example. Even one drink per day has been associated with a measurable increase in risk. For postmenopausal women, whose baseline risk is already rising, that additional bump matters. Alcohol increases circulating estrogen levels, and breast tissue is hormonally sensitive. Over years and decades, that exposure compounds. And then there's the liver. As we age, the liver's resilience declines. Chronic alcohol intake can lead to fatty liver disease, fibrosis, and cirrhosis, all of which dramatically increase the risk of liver cancer. Liver cancer incidence has been rising globally, and alcohol plays a significant role. But what about the heart health argument? For years, moderate drinking, particularly red wine, was promoted as cardioprotective. Much of that data came from observational studies. People who drank moderately appeared to have lower rates of heart disease. But more recent analyses suggest that this may have been partly due to confounding factors. Moderate drinkers often have higher socioeconomic status, healthier diets, better access to healthcare, and stronger social networks. When we look at more rigorous analysis, the protective effect shrinks or disappears. Meanwhile, the cancer risk remains. After 50, the calculus changes. Even if there were a small cardiovascular benefit, which is increasingly debated, the cancer risk may outweigh it, especially considering that heart health can be improved through safer, evidence-based strategies, whole plant foods, physical activity, maintaining a healthy weight, managing blood pressure, and not smoking. There's another issue rarely discussed: cumulative exposure. Cancer is often the result of long-term processes. If someone has been drinking for 30 years, continuing that exposure into their 50s and 60s adds to the lifetime burden. The body doesn't reset at midlife. The damage accumulates, and tolerance changes with age. Body composition shifts, less muscle, more fat. Alcohol becomes more concentrated in the bloodstream. The same amount of alcohol can produce higher blood levels than it did decades earlier. That means greater biological impact from the same drink. Let's be clear, risk is dose dependent. Heavy drinking confers higher risk than light drinking. But even low levels are not risk-free. The idea that a little is good, more is bad, doesn't hold up cleanly when it comes to cancer. So what should someone over 50 do? First, recognize that alcohol is not a health food. It is not a medicine. It is a psychoactive substance with known carcinogenic properties. Second, consider reduction. If you drink daily, cutting back to occasional use reduces cumulative exposure. If you drink socially, consider alcohol-free alternatives. The growing availability of non-alcoholic beverages makes this easier than ever. Third, evaluate your personal risk. Family history of breast, colon, or liver cancer. That may tip the scale further toward avoidance. Already have fatty liver disease or metabolic syndrome. Alcohol adds fuel to the fire. And finally, remember that pleasure and social connection don't require ethanol. The ritual, the conversation, the relaxation, these can be preserved without the carcinogen. The goal isn't fear. It's informed choice. After 50, our margin for error narrows. The body becomes less forgiving. Small risks that seem trivial at 30 become more consequential at 60. Alcohol and cancer is not a controversial topic in the scientific community. The evidence is consistent across populations and study designs. The only controversy tends to arise in cultural narratives and marketing. So if the question is alcohol safe after 50? From a cancer perspective, the safest level is none. That doesn't mean everyone who drinks will develop cancer. Risk is probabilistic, not deterministic. But it does mean that reducing or eliminating alcohol is one of the simplest, most evidence-based ways to lower your cancer risk as you age. And unlike many things in medicine, this is a risk factor fully within your control. Alcohol is classified as a Group 1 carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is the cancer research arm of the World Health Organization. That classification is not casual, and it's not based on animal speculation. Group 1 means there is strong, consistent evidence in humans that the substance causes cancer. It places alcohol in the same scientific category as tobacco smoke and asbestos, not because they are equally dangerous in every context, but because the evidence linking them to cancer is definitive. When alcohol enters the body, it is metabolized into acetaldehyde, a toxic compound that can directly damage DNA. DNA damage is the initiating event in cancer development. If that damage is not properly repaired, and repair mechanisms become less efficient as we age, mutations can accumulate. Over time, those mutations can allow cells to grow uncontrollably. Alcohol is strongly linked to several specific cancers. Breast cancer risk increases even at low levels of intake. Colorectal cancer risk rises with regular consumption. Alcohol is a major contributor to liver cancer, particularly when chronic liver inflammation or cirrhosis develops. It also increases the risk of cancers of the mouth, throat, and esophagus, especially when combined with smoking. What makes this especially important is that alcohol-related cancer risk is dose-dependent, but begins at relatively low levels of consumption. There is no clear biological threshold below which cancer risk drops to zero. The more frequently alcohol is consumed, and the longer the exposure over a lifetime, the greater the cumulative risk becomes. This isn't speculation. It's the scientific consensus built on decades of epidemiological and mechanistic research. Even light or moderate drinking increases cancer risk. That's one of the most misunderstood and uncomfortable findings in modern nutrition science. For years, moderate drinking was framed as neutral or even beneficial, especially in the context of heart health. But when researchers isolate cancer outcomes specifically, a different picture emerges. Large population studies consistently show that cancer risk begins to rise at low levels of alcohol intake. We're not just talking about heavy drinking. Even one drink per day has been associated with a measurable increase in breast cancer risk in women. Colorectal cancer risk also creeps upward with regular moderate intake. The increase per individual may appear small, but across millions of people, that small shift translates into a substantial number of additional cancer cases. Biologically, this makes sense. Alcohol is metabolized into acetaldehyde, a compound that can damage DNA even at relatively low concentrations. There is no built-in biological mechanism that renders the first drink safe and only the third or fourth harmful. The carcinogenic process doesn't switch on at a specific threshold. Instead, risk accumulates gradually with exposure. It's also important to distinguish between relative and absolute risk. A modest relative increase may sound insignificant, but when baseline cancer risk already rises after age 50, even a small percentage bump becomes more meaningful. The idea that a small daily drink is harmless largely comes from cultural narratives and selective interpretations of cardiovascular data. But when focusing specifically on cancer, the evidence indicates that risk starts at low levels and increases steadily with greater consumption. Moderation reduces risk compared to heavy drinking, but it does not eliminate it. Cancer risk naturally rises with age, and that's not accidental. Cancer is, in many ways, a disease of accumulated damage. Every day, our cells experience thousands of tiny DNA injuries from normal metabolism, environmental exposures, and lifestyle factors. When we're younger, our bodies are generally more efficient at repairing that damage. DNA repair enzymes work more effectively, immune surveillance is stronger, and abnormal cells are more likely to be identified and eliminated before they become dangerous. After 50, those protective systems begin to lose efficiency. DNA repair mechanisms slow down. Telomeres shorten. Mitochondrial function declines. The immune system becomes less vigilant, a process sometimes referred to as immunosenescence. This means mutated or precancerous cells are more likely to slip through the cracks. At the same time, decades of prior exposure have already accumulated. If someone has been drinking alcohol regularly for 20 or 30 years, their cells have endured repeated exposure to acetaldehyde, oxidative stress, and inflammation. That cumulative burden matters. Cancer rarely develops from a single exposure. It develops from long-term, repeated insults layered on top of each other. Alcohol's carcinogenic effects may therefore become more consequential after 50. The same amount of alcohol that a 30-year-old body might better compensate for can have a greater biological impact in a 60-year-old body with slower repair capacity. In addition, body composition changes with age, typically less muscle and more fat, leading to higher blood alcohol concentrations from the same intake. So alcohol isn't entering a neutral system. After 50, it's entering a biological environment that is already more vulnerable, less resilient, and carrying a lifetime of accumulated cellular stress. More alcohol equals more risk. The relationship between alcohol and cancer is dose-dependent, meaning the greater the exposure, the greater the likelihood of harm. Heavy drinking dramatically increases the risk of multiple cancers, including liver, esophageal, colorectal, and breast cancer. In heavy drinkers, the risk isn't just slightly elevated. It can be several times higher compared to non-drinkers, particularly for cancers of the upper digestive tract and liver. But what makes this issue especially important is that the curve doesn't suddenly start at heavy drinking. It rises gradually. Even one drink per day has been linked to measurable increases in cancer risk, particularly for breast and colorectal cancer. For breast cancer, research consistently shows that risk increases with each additional daily drink. This is thought to be partly due to alcohol's effect on circulating estrogen levels, which can stimulate the growth of hormone-sensitive breast tissue. Over years and decades, that modest hormonal shift may contribute to higher cancer incidence. For colorectal cancer, alcohol may promote tumor formation through multiple mechanisms, including DNA damage from acetaldehyde, increased oxidative stress, and interference with folate metabolism, which is crucial for DNA repair and synthesis. Regular exposure, even at moderate levels, can gradually increase vulnerability. Importantly, dose-dependent does not mean threshold-dependent. There isn't a clearly defined, safe line below which risk disappears. Instead, risk accumulates progressively as intake increases. Heavy drinking carries the highest danger, but moderate drinking is not neutral. This matters especially after 50, when baseline cancer risk is already rising. Adding even a small, consistent carcinogenic exposure can shift overall risk in a measurable way. Reducing intake lowers risk proportionally, because when it comes to alcohol and cancer, less truly is better. Unlike genetics, family history, or the simple passage of time, alcohol intake is fully modifiable. You can't change your age, you can't rewrite your DNA, but you can decide what and how much you drink. That makes alcohol one of the most actionable cancer risk factors after 50. Cancer risk is influenced by a combination of fixed and lifestyle factors. While we often focus on what we can't control, the most powerful prevention strategies tend to involve daily habits. Alcohol is a direct exposure to a known carcinogen. Reducing that exposure reduces biological stress on the body. Fewer drinks mean less acetaldehyde formation, less oxidative damage, less hormonal disruption, and less chronic inflammation, all mechanisms linked to cancer development. Importantly, risk reduction can begin quickly. The body has remarkable capacity to repair when harmful exposures are lowered. Liver function can improve. Inflammatory markers can decline. Hormone levels can stabilize. While past exposure cannot be erased, future exposure can absolutely be limited. That shifts the trajectory. After 50, when cancer screening becomes more common and awareness increases, it makes sense to pair early detection with prevention. Choosing to cut back or eliminate alcohol is a practical, evidence-based step that requires no prescription, no expensive intervention, and no complex protocol. This doesn't mean perfection is required. It means understanding that every reduction matters. Fewer drinking days per week, smaller portions, alcohol-free alternatives. Each of these choices lowers cumulative lifetime exposure. In a stage of life where health becomes more precious and recovery slower, prioritizing modifiable risk factors carries even greater value. Alcohol intake is one of them, and changing it is entirely within reach.